Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Critical Reactions with your host, Bryan. We are going to finish up this week's theme of old versus new. We're going to be checking out a newer track from Ulver. Yesterday we checked out one of their older tracks, and I mentioned that I really enjoyed some of the DNA that they were putting into the black metal sound that was really their own and trying to shape that genre into something that they could really say is theirs and put their stamp on it. But it was very rough around the edges, which I attributed to sort of just being more of a, lacking the experience since it was one of their earlier albums. So I'm hoping to see if they can shape that sound into something that's definitely them. What we're going to be checking out today is a song called Little Boy by them. And let's get into this. Let's see what they're doing.
More thunder runs.
What?
Than drums. The golden eagle. The solar symbol. In the skies. It's a movement. A fearful symmetry. Than drums. The golden eagle.
I love those little snare runs. Yeah. Very theatrical, much louder sounds. Yeah, and like this guitar part right here. You can still hear tinges of that black metal sound. They've just really ditched the tremolo picking for holding out the notes, which I mentioned yesterday is just, they're pretty much the same thing. You just get a lot more of that aggressive attack with the tremolo picking. Yeah, the drumming is stealing the show for me here. Ooh, the hi-hat play. Very interesting. Yeah, so that last section was pretty cool. We had constant rising notes. We had a nice sforzando at the end on something that sounded like a brass. Uh, I'm gonna say it's a sample, maybe. And see, this is what I was talking about. There's a nice transition into this acoustic section with the bagpipes this time rather than acoustic guitars. But this still seems out of place against what we had just listened to. But there's a nice transition that you're really going to get out of having more experience writing music. Yeah, and I think the other cool thing there is that that transition showed something that they didn't have before, and that is patience and also respect for time. That transition was really close to hitting silence, and they didn't try to rush into the bagpipe section. They really let that breathe and sit there. And I really thought we were just gonna keep fading out until the song ended, and then the bagpipe faded in. And yeah, there's just a really long gap of time there between when we were leaving that, synthy Euro pop kind of sound, um, and moving into that bagpipe outro. Um, so yeah, again, experience, knowing what you want to make, and really laying it down. So I'm gonna try to analyze this on its own, and then we're gonna look a little bit at how this compares to Ulver's older work that we checked out yesterday. Um, so this song is heavy in atmosphere. There are some really cool musicianship sections, but for the most part, I'd say a lot of it is kind of lines up with sort of synthy electronica stuff where you just kind of keep a very simple beat and maybe some overarching musical ideas, some notes and some harmonies, and you put a fairly simple melodic layer over all that, which is going to be the vocals in this situation, and you get a really nice sort of dancey atmospheric song. But like I said, there is some really cool things going on in here. Um, there is something almost black metal like in that guitar part when it comes in. It has this nice grittiness, crunchiness to it, but it isn't overbearing. And a lot of the times it's pushed into the mix underneath some of the synth work. But when it does get a chance to shine and rise up a little bit, it adds this crunch to it that's very reminiscent of their black metal work. Another cool thing is that it's holding out these long notes. I don't think there's tremolo picking, but there is some sort of effect on it that sounds like we're getting these very light attacks, almost like a legato feel. And I'm going to say that is it's probably a digital effect. I'm trying to think of a way that you could really get that legato sound, and the only thing I could think is these very light, like finger picking, but like not really getting under the string, but just like very lightly walking across it. Um, but I think it's going to stop the sound too much. There's going to be too much of a gap between the two hits, the two attacks. So I think it's a digital thing, but it is interesting that we still have this idea of constant attacks in the music. So that's pretty cool. I'm going to dig into a little bit more of that black metal influence when we start comparing this to the older work, but I do want to bring that up right now that the guitar still is doing some black metal ideas. The song does work a lot with atmosphere. There is this dark broodingness to the entire song that to me is the core, it's the heart of the song. Whether it's the melodic line and the emotions that they're pulling out of that, or the guitar and synth stuff that's going on around it, and the tones that they're using, the timbres they're using, the wide reverb, and some of the effects they're using on that. And then, of course, the notes that they're choosing that are creating some tension and some darkness into the song and adding that in. The drums, I mentioned, stand out. The drums, bar none, are what kept me involved this entire time, even though everything else in this song is very pop related. The drums are just killing it. They don't care that this is a poppy, almost dance adjacent track. They're really doing their own thing. One of the things that stood out to me is those eighth note snare hits that are just mixed so punchy. It almost sounds like, a machine gun firing. And just you got this nice boom, boom, and then ga 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 ga. You get these really strong snare hits just like out of nowhere, and it breaks up the entire pacing of the song, and it just diverts your attention straight to the drums. And I think it's really interesting that that was the moment when I really started to pay attention. It's like the drummer's like, hey, listen to me. I'm about to do some stuff. We're going to break this down. And it's not too long after that we start seeing these really crazy snare fills where he gets these nice dynamics, these volume swells where he just rolls the snare. He starts out soft and then gets real loud and brings it back down. And he does like 3 of those in a row. And I love that. Snare swells are just so cool, and they're not used often enough, anywhere near often enough in metal, which is very drum kit orient, very very snare oriented. And there just is not enough sort of classical or marching style, DCI style snare work in rock and metal. And I really love that it's here. Um, and then after that, we get into these really sick, like 16th note hi-hats, working in closed hi-hats versus open hi-hats, and just really fun rhythmic ideas on it. And then, of course, that just goes into this entire drum fill section right before we wrap it back up in the final chorus, I think. And yeah, everything about this drumming is just amazing. I love it. And it's such an interesting subversion because up until that point, the first minute and a half or 2 minutes or so, the drums are kind of introducing some of these cool ideas, but for the most part, they're really just laying down the beat and digging into that synth pop idea of, emphasizing the downbeats to make it feel dancey. And yeah, it's just this little subversion. Like, yeah, you thought we were just a dance pop track. Check this out, though. Just laying down some fun stuff. I love it. Um, and that subversion kind of works through all of this. The lyrics, the vocal part, has this sort of 80s singing in the back of your throat kind of sound, getting that really wide, lower tone. It kind of throws me back to the 80s, but then there's like this really sinister 2000s esque quality to the vocals as well. It's missing that bright and cheeriness that we saw a lot of in the 80s. The vocals almost remind me a bit of Rick Astley, but if like he was an edgelord. And I don't mean that in any negative way, but it's just really interesting that that's where my brain went. It has that sort of 80s pop feel, but just darker. So again, subversion. They're utilizing something we know and using it in a way that is not necessarily something that we associate with it. So yeah, that's just really cool. Same thing with the guitar. And this is where we're going to start transitioning into the comparative aspect, where we're looking at how this song works and works off of and is an evolution of their older works. So I think a lot of people would listen to this and say, wow, they've really changed their sound. And yes, in a broad sense, this is very different from what they did earlier with their very standard black metal stuff. But there's also a lot of ideas in their earlier works that are cropping up here as well. And I really don't think this is that far away from their black metal style music as a lot of people would think. One of the things that I think really they emphasized in the last track was atmosphere through aggression, and sort of trying to work in folk elements into black metal music. Now we can see a lot of that same idea cropping up here. We have a very atmospheric track. It is not created through aggression. We don't have the constant attacks, but we still have a very overbearing, seemingly sinister atmosphere going along with the music. And the same thing can be said for the vocals. They're not that growl anymore. It's not this in your face, we're definitely, not writing happy music kind of an idea, but it's pulled back a little bit. It's still there, it's just restrained. The vocals, they do showcase a little bit of softness to them. They're clean now, but there's still that sinister edge to them that works well within the atmosphere that they're creating. And with that idea, it's very easy to see how they went from black metal to this. This is just sort of a softening up of that black metal sound while retaining many of the same ideas. And we can even see this in the guitar. I mentioned yesterday, actually, that when I listen to black metal and I think about the guitar work, I typically forget about all the attacks. I don't think about the tremolo picking. I don't think about the fact that it's 16th notes. A lot of black metal tends to hang on to a single note and play it repeatedly. So I tend to see it as whole notes and half notes rather than, 16th notes and eighth notes. And in that vein, I think we can see a lot of the same stuff cropping up here, especially with that guitar itself. It has this gritty, dirty tone that's very reminiscent of what we listened to yesterday. It's just that the volume has been pulled back and some of the notes feel like they've been elongated. Since instead of having 16 16th notes in a bar, we have one whole note in a bar, but it's doing the same thing. It's creating that same note and creating the atmosphere that the note is working within. We're just not seeing so many attacks in it. I think that if the guitar part that is utilized here, if they had went to tremolo picking rather than these whole notes, I think the song, well, first of all, it would have a little bit different feel to it. We would have that aggressiveness back, but I think the song would also feel very black metal to a lot of people. And it really is that the two ideas are doing the same exact thing. They're just doing it in slightly different ways. I even mentioned earlier that I think they're using a digital effect to create a legato idea going on. So it isn't necessarily one whole long note. It is 16 16th notes, but there's just less of a harsh attack on it. So you don't quite feel every single stroke. You don't quite feel the gap between all these notes. So you're still getting a very similar idea to that tremolo picking, just again, softened down a little bit, not as harsh. But I think where we see this most powerfully is in the drums. The drums still retain that aggressive in-your-faceness. They still have moments of very quick, repeated attacks. Even when they're not as fast as they used to be, like with yesterday's alternating snare and bass idea that we checked out. Just really fast alternating snare and bass. This one we tend to see a lot more of more simplified ideas of that aggressiveness, like the aforementioned repeated snare hits that show up throughout the middle of the song that sort of call attention to the drummer. It is very harsh, it's very abrasive. We're getting those constant attacks and it feels a bit out of place with the music, but I feel like it's just a callback to their older stuff. And I don't know. Like I said, I think most people would listen to this and maybe get a hint of their old stuff, but kind of feel like they've just kind of jumped and went in a completely different direction. But I see a very, very linear and close line between this and what we checked out yesterday. It does intrigue me, though. It retains some of that simple composition pattern, but does so in a interesting way. It intrigues me. It grabs my attention. I don't know what to think of it yet as a whole. It is a dark synth pop kind of style that has black metal sprinkled throughout it. I can't say I've heard anything like that before. At the beginning, I really just wanted to jam and dance, But halfway through, that drum started coming in and the black metal stuff started to seep in. That's when the guitar started to show up as well. And it wasn't so dancey anymore. It was like I got tricked. A little bit of bait and switch going on there. And that's just interesting. It's I don't want to say it's gimmicky, but it's definitely, what's that word that I like and I just can't think of right now? Novel. It is novel. I've never heard anything like this before. I don't know if this has any longevity for me, but I am interested in checking out the rest of this album and seeing what else they have done with this unique combination of black metal and like 80s Euro pop kind of stuff. 80s synth pop meets modern Euro pop, something like that. I don't know. There's just so many different ideas being utilized in this song alone, and yeah, I'm really intrigued. I want to know what else they're doing here. This is totally not what I was expecting, though. I was really thinking we were going to see something like we did with Reagan, where they refined the ideas of that black metal into a very modern sound while retaining the black metal genre. And yeah, they kind of did this just in a completely different direction. I expected them to head straight, and they just kind of took a left at Albuquerque and ended up somewhere weird. And I dig it. I dig the weird. So yeah, this is for you guys, Camino. If you got any context to this, let me know. I'm I'm interested how they got here. I don't know if I would enjoy everything between what we checked out yesterday and this song, Little Boy, but maybe if you have some songs that kind of go along the way and create a path between these two tracks or between these two styles, I'd be interested in that. I'd check that out. And also, is this indicative of other stuff they've created, or is this cherry picked out of their newer works? If this is indicative, I'm going to have to check this album out. Just because, like I mentioned, I need to know how far they go with combining these two ideas and really diving into this rabbit hole and seeing where it takes them. But on the whole, I'm just impressed. If you're impressed, go ahead and comment that as well. This is just a really cool way of taking a sound that you start with and putting your own stamp on it. Like I mentioned, this is still very much black metal. You can feel the black metal inspirations here. It feels like it's a black metal foundation. It just went a completely different direction, and I love that. It is very much these guys. I would not confuse this with anyone else. When you're done commenting, you can head up to the description box. There's a link in there for Linktree, which is a nice menu with everything related to the channel, whether you want to join the Discord, support us through Patreon, follow me on Twitter, submit a special selection. All those links are found in the link tree. It's very nifty. Above that, you can like, subscribe, and ring the bell. I'll be back tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 9 p.m. UTC with yet another reaction. We're going to be looking into some special selections over the weekend before moving into the next theme. Until next time, remember to be critical, not cynical, of the music you listen to, and have a fantastic morning, afternoon, or evening whenever you choose to watch my videos.